Picture the last time you climbed into bed. You settled in, you shut your eyes, and the next thing you knew, it was morning. Somewhere in between, an entire 8 hours simply disappeared. Not blurry, not half-remembered, just erased. There's no slow fade you can replay in your head, no gradual dimming of thoughts you can trace backward. 1 second you're lying there, drifting through some random idea, and then nothing. A hard cut to morning. You don't recall the final thought that crossed your mind. You don't recall your eyelids growing too heavy to fight. You don't recall the exact instant you stopped being you and started being unconscious. Why does that line vanish so completely? It sounds like a small question, but sit with it for a second and it gets uncomfortable fast. You'll spend close to 1/3 of your life asleep. That means you've crossed this threshold tens of thousands of times. You'd think, after that many repetitions, you'd remember at least one. And yet, every single night it slips by without leaving a trace. No final scene, no fade to black you can actually watch. Just absence. To understand why, we have to go into your skull and look at what your brain is doing in those last conscious minutes. And once you see it, the mystery doesn't shrink. It gets stranger. Let's start with the chemistry. All day long, while you're awake, your brain is working, burning fuel, and that process leaves behind a byproduct called adenosine. It doesn't flush out, it accumulates hour after hour, like a debt quietly stacking up that you can't pay off until you sleep. The longer you stay awake, the heavier that buildup gets. And adenosine isn't passive. It actively presses down on the brain systems responsible for keeping you alert, making you feel slower, foggier, and increasingly desperate to lie down. That's the heaviness you feel by 9 at night. It's also why coffee works the way it does. Caffeine doesn't hand you new energy. It blocks the receptors that read adenosine, so your brain simply stops noticing how exhausted it already is. You're not refueled. You're just temporarily blind to your own fatigue. At the same time, your circadian rhythm, the internal clock running quietly inside a region of your hypothalamus, starts winding down your alertness as evening falls. The brain releases melatonin. Your core temperature dips slightly. Bit by bit, the entire chemical balance tilts away from wakefulness and toward sleep. Then, when the conditions line up, something almost mechanical happens. A small cluster of neurons begins actively shutting down the very systems that keep you conscious, dialing back the chemical signals like norepinephrine and serotonin that normally keep your mind switched on. Your brain, in a sense, talks itself off the ledge of being awake. And somewhere in that process, something happens to a structure called the thalamus. This is where the real answer to our question begins to take shape. Under normal waking conditions, your thalamus works like a switchboard. Everything you see, hear, or feel gets routed through it on the way to your thinking brain. It's the reason a sound becomes something you consciously notice, the reason you feel the sheets against your skin and register that you're feeling it. When sleep begins, that switchboard starts closing its lines. A structure that sits beside it starts suppressing the thalamus's outgoing signals, gradually cutting the feed of sensory information heading toward your cortex. The buzz of your phone across the room, a car outside, the hum of a fan, none of it gets forwarded upstairs anymore. And your cortex, the part of you responsible for conscious experience and for laying down memories, starts running dry on input. Without input, there's almost nothing left to record. This, right here, is most of your answer. You can't remember falling asleep because falling asleep is, quite literally, your brain dismantling its own ability to take notes. The thalamus stops forwarding, the cortex goes dim, the machinery that normally encode a memory shuts off before you're even fully gone. So those final minutes of wakefulness are spent inside a brain that's becoming less and less able to log what's actually occurring. It's like filming on a phone whose battery is dying mid-recording. The last few seconds aren't lost because nothing happened. They're lost because the equipment doing the recording gave out first. But here's where it gets even weirder. Your brain doesn't simply power down in silence. There's a phase almost nobody talks about, one of the strangest and most overlooked experiences a human being has every single night. It's called hypnagogia. This is the in-between state, technically the first stage of sleep, where you're neither fully awake nor underslept. It can last seconds, it can stretch for several minutes, and during it, your brain does something genuinely bizarre. The cortex hasn't fully shut off yet. The thalamus is closing its gate, but the gate isn't sealed. And in that narrow window, your mind starts generating sensations entirely on its own, spontaneous, unprompted, essentially small hallucinations, even if that word sounds more dramatic than the experience actually is. What does this look like if researchers awake someone mid-episode? People report drifting geometric shapes, sudden flashes of a face or a place that means nothing, the sound of their own name being called from nowhere, a snippet of music with no source, and the most famous of them all, the sudden sensation of falling, followed instantly by a violent full-bodied jolt that snaps you wide awake. That jolt has a name, a hypnic jerk, and somewhere around 60 to 70% of people experience it. You know the one. You're drifting off, and suddenly you're plummeting off a ledge that was never there. Your whole body convulses, and whoever's next to you wants to know what on earth just happened. Nobody has fully nailed down why it occurs. One leading idea is that your brain misreads the muscle relaxation of falling asleep as the sensation of losing your balance and fires off a panicked correction signal in response. True or not, the body's reaction is instant and thoroughly indignified. During this stage, the visual parts of your cortex stay surprisingly active, conjuring up imagery with nothing real behind it. The areas handling sound show similar activity too, which is why people sometimes hear voices or noises that were never actually there. But here's the part that matters most. Almost nobody wakes up remembering any of it. Not because it didn't happen, it absolutely happened, but because the very systems responsible for storing memory were already powering down while it was unfolding. The hippocampus, the structure that normally converts experience into lasting memory, is in a kind of limbo during this stage. Some research even suggests this particular sleep stage is linked more to forgetting than to remembering. So somewhere in your skull, almost every night, you live through a genuine hallucination, light shows, a dramatic fake plummet through space, and you remember absolutely none of it. Here's another layer that makes this even harder to picture cleanly. Falling asleep isn't one clean switch flipping from on to off. It's messy, gradual, and different regions of your brain don't cross that line at the same moment. Researchers describe it as a local process. Some parts of your cortex can slip into something resembling sleep, while neighboring regions are still wide awake. That's likely why, if you've ever caught yourself nodding off somewhere awkward, a long meeting, a lecture, your cousin's overlong wedding speech, you sometimes have a faint, half-formed sense that something was happening right before you jolted back. One part of your brain might still have been listening, while another part had already clocked out.
The exact moment sleep actually begins, the one moment you'd need to remember in order to remember falling asleep, isn't really a single moment at all. It's a slow, region-by-region shutdown. And by the time the parts responsible for self-awareness and memory finally go quiet, the parts responsible for recording that very transition have usually already stopped working. The observer is the last thing to leave, and it leaves before it can write anything down. Imagine trying to film yourself drifting off by holding the camera yourself. Eventually, your grip relaxes, the camera slips from your hand, and the last frames you capture are just the ceiling spinning away as it hits the floor. Whatever happened in those final seconds was never cleanly caught, and by the time things go still, the camera has already stopped rolling. Now layer one more thing onto all of this. Sleep isn't just a blank pause. It's actively a memory editing process. Through the night, your brain reinforces certain memories from the day and quietly deletes others. It's doing maintenance, choosing what to keep and what to throw out. And this editing is selective. It doesn't save everything by default. It makes judgment calls. So where does the experience of falling asleep itself land on that list? Dead last, most likely. It carries no useful information, no emotional weight, nothing relevant to survival. It's just the sensation of lying in the dark, slowly going hazy. Your brain is a ruthless editor, and across every human being, every single night in recorded history, it has quietly agreed this particular footage doesn't make the final cut. Meanwhile, the hippocampus does show some intriguing activity right as sleep begins, something that looks like rapid processing. But this likely isn't new memory being created. It may be your brain sorting and tagging what you've already experienced that day, deciding what's worth keeping. Think of it as an overnight editor combing through the day's footage, and the act of editing never makes it into the final movie. There's something almost philosophical hiding underneath all of this if you let yourself sit with it. The fact that you can't remember falling asleep means there's a nightly gap in your own experience that you are completely blind to. You feel like a single, unbroken thread of awareness running from the moment you wake up to the moment you close your eyes. But that thread snaps every night. And you never notice because the part of you capable of noticing is the exact part that switches off. For roughly 8 out of every 24 hours, you simply aren't there. And you feel nothing about that absence because feeling an absence of consciousness would itself require consciousness. The ancient Greeks seemed to sense something like this long before any of the science existed. Aristotle once described sleep as a state suspended somewhere between living and not living. The Greeks linked sleep to Hypnos and gave him a twin brother named Thanatos, the god of death. Not because they thought sleep itself was lethal, but because there was something quietly unsettling about a self that switches off every night, only for something claiming to be that same self to wake up and continue the story. Most of us are fine with it because morning comes and we feel like the same person, same memories, same personality. The sense of continuity feels seamless, but feeling continuous and actually being continuous aren't necessarily the same thing. And the question of what exactly survives that nightly gap is the kind of thing that sounds like idle philosophy right up until 2 in the morning when you're lying awake, wired on coffee you probably shouldn't have had, wondering where exactly you go every single night when the lights go out in your own head. You will fall asleep again tonight, and tomorrow morning you won't remember a single second of it happening. Think about that for a moment. Somewhere between brushing your teeth and the alarm going off, you crossed the single strangest border the human brain ever crosses, the line between being you and not being you, and you slept right through the crossing. So where did that memory go? It starts long before you actually lose consciousness, hours earlier, really. A molecule called adenosine has been quietly building up in your system all day, pressing down on your alertness like a weight slowly settling onto your shoulders. As darkness falls, melatonin joins in, nudging your internal clock toward shutdown. Together, this slow chemical tide tips your brain away from wakefulness long before you ever feel sleepy enough to notice. Then your brain begins switching off its own recording devices while you're technically still awake. A structure deep in the center of your skull called the thalamus starts closing a gate. That gate is what normally lets sound, light, and touch flow up into the thinking part of your brain. Once it swings shut, your cortex stops receiving the raw material it needs to build experience or memory. At almost the same time, your hippocampus, the part of you responsible for filing away new memories, quietly clocks out. It stops saving anything new and switches into overnight maintenance mode instead, sorting through the day's events like a librarian closing up shop for the night. And the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that knows it's you, the part watching the show from behind your eyes, that goes dark first, before almost anything else. It's the most sophisticated part of your entire nervous system, and it's also the first one to leave the room. By the time all of this finishes happening, there is no one left awake inside your skull to notice it happened at all. Here's what that actually means. In the gap between your last clear memory and the alarm going off, an entire event took place without a witness. The thalamus sealed shut. Strange geometric shapes and phantom voices flickered through your mind, fractals folding into each other, half-heard conversations from rooms that don't exist. Somewhere in there, your body probably convinced itself it was falling and lurched awake for no reason. And region by region, your own awareness dimmed like lights going out down a long hallway. A full performance with no audience, because the only audience member was also the one disappearing. Every single night, you vanish. And somehow that's fine with you. It's fine because you always come back. Your brain struck this bargain a long time ago. 8 hours gone in exchange for a repaired, sharper version of you by morning. Memory of the actual crossing was never part of the deal. Honestly, given how bizarre that crossing really is, maybe forgetting it is a mercy. If you remembered the hallucinations, the phantom falling, the slow collapse of your own awareness piece by piece, you'd probably never want to close your eyes again. Let's talk about that falling feeling, the hypnic jerk. It deserves more credit than it gets. Picture it. You're lying there, calm, drifting. Your muscles are loosening on purpose, exactly as your brain intended, easing you toward sleep. Your heart rate slows, your breath goes shallow, everything is proceeding exactly as planned. And then, out of nowhere, your brain panics. Some part of your transitioning nervous system mistakes that sudden muscle release for something else entirely, not lying down, falling. So it fires a frantic, uncoordinated alarm through your motor system, screaming at every muscle to grab onto something right now.
That's the jerk. That's the gasp. That's the flailing limb that has startled sleeping partners since the beginning of human history. One theory traces it back to ancestors who slept in trees, where a sudden loss of muscle tone really could mean a fatal drop, and a reflexive grab really could save your life. It's a tidy explanation, the kind that makes a strange reflex feel like ancient wisdom rather than a glitch. Whether or not that's the true origin, the reflex never got the memo that we moved indoors. It still fires. It still humiliates you in front of anyone watching. Here's the twist, though. Even when that jerk yanks you fully awake, even after your whole body throws itself into a panic, you almost never remember what your mind was doing right before. Whatever images, whatever sounds were drifting through that strange in-between state, gone. The jerk wakes you, you're briefly startled, maybe a little embarrassed, and within minutes you're sliding right back into the exact same process with zero memory of having done it already. Your brain repeats this loop over and over and saves none of it. Now here's where it gets genuinely interesting. Sleep researchers have spent decades waking people up at different points along this slide into unconsciousness just to ask what they were experiencing in that exact instant. Wake someone right at the very start, the earliest seconds of stage 1, and they'll usually describe something fragmented,
A face, a color, a single shape with no story attached, like flipping through slides built by someone who's never seen a slideshow before. No plot, no thread connecting any of it. Go a little deeper and the reports shift. More detail creeps in, a vague sense of place. Sounds appear from nowhere. Occasionally there's the faint outline of a story trying to assemble itself, and then it dissolves the instant the person is woken. Ask them to describe it 30 seconds later, and it's already slipping through their fingers. Ask a minute later, and it's gone completely. This runs backwards from how dreams usually work. Deeper sleep, the dreams that arrive later in the night, can sometimes survive into morning, especially if you wake right in the middle of one. The brain seems to handle those dreams differently, holding on to them just long enough for you to grab a fragment before it fades. But these earlier visions, the ones at the very threshold of sleep, are so fragile, so loosely stitched together, that they exist for only a moment before they're erased. They may be the least durable thoughts your brain ever produces. Which means you're living through something genuinely strange and entirely private nearly every single night, an unrepeatable performance staged just for you and carrying back zero proof of it. Your brain runs its own private light show, then deletes the footage before morning. There's one more piece to this puzzle. Sleep scientists have a name for a condition where people are absolutely convinced they barely slept, certain they lay awake for hours, even when lab equipment shows they slept just fine, undisturbed through the night. It's sometimes called paradoxical insomnia or sleep state misperception. It sounds like the brain simply lying to itself, and in a strange way, it is. But it reveals something deeper, something almost unsettling once you really sit with it. Your sense of being awake versus asleep is not something you can fully trust. Some people will swear they tracked every minute of a sleepless night. They'll insist they were conscious the entire time, staring at the ceiling, counting the hours as they crawl by. Meanwhile, the brainwave readings tell a completely different story. Stage 1, Stage 2, sometimes deeper. Their brain was unmistakably asleep, while the voice inside their head kept insisting otherwise. We're awake, we never went under, not even for a minute. So when exactly did you actually fall asleep? Can you even say for certain? Maybe that question doesn't have a clean answer, not just philosophically, but biologically, because your brain's actual state and the story your brain tells itself about that state can split apart completely. The machinery shuts down for the night, while some inner narrator keeps talking right until it just stops, and you never notice the narrator going quiet, because by then, you're already gone. So, here's the full picture. You can't remember falling asleep because an entire cascade of overlapping shutdowns destroys your ability to form memories before unconsciousness even fully arrives. Chemicals build up and tip your brain away from wakefulness. Your arousal system flips toward off. The thalamus seals the sensory gate. The hippocampus stops filing anything new. And the prefrontal cortex, the most essential part of you, the part that knows it's watching, powers down before the rest. Somewhere inside all of that, the part of you capable of recording the experience stops existing before the experience is even finished. The hallucinations arrive and vanish unrecorded. The jerk fires and fades. Your brainwaves slide from alert to relaxed to drowsy, and the whole crossing happens without a single witness standing by to remember it. By the time you're fully under, every system you'd need to document the journey has already gone dark. It looks like a flaw, a gap, a piece missing from the story of your own mind. But it isn't broken at all. Your brain isn't failing to capture that moment. It's choosing sleep over documentation every time. And honestly, that's probably the right trade. A brain busy filming itself fall asleep would be a brain too distracted to actually rest. And every morning you simply pick back up, feeling like the same continuous person who closed their eyes and opened them again, with no memory of the disappearance, the hallucinations, the wipe, and the quiet shutdown and restart of your own mind. You will fall asleep thousands more times before your life is over, You will never remember a single one of them. And somehow, that's completely fine.